Hello and welcome to the Baby Giants Investing Podcast. Join us as we chat about the weird and wild world of small cap investing, all while searching for the precious few fast-growing businesses that have a shot at becoming industry giants. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is strictly not intended as financial advice. Any opinions are general in nature and do not take into account your personal circumstances, needs, or objectives. Securities mentioned are for illustration purposes only, and this podcast should not influence investment decisions. You should read the relevant PDS and consider speaking to a financial advisor before making investment decisions. Past performance is no indicator of future returns. Podcast guests and their clients may hold positions in the securities discussed in this podcast. All right, we're live. It's me and Andrew in the house today. Claude is traveling again, still, I guess, in Perth. But let's jump in with some good news. So I've got a couple. I'm prepared this time as well, Andrew.
I know, it's really unheard of.
This one's kind of mixed on whether it's good news or not. But Ozempic, oops baby, sparked debate as users fall pregnant. So a lot of people who have been on Ozempic and had been trying to get pregnant for a long time and hadn't been able to are suddenly finding themselves pregnant. And yeah, there's some speculation about what's doing it, whether it's just that they're losing weight, becoming healthier. Losing weight's one of the first things if you're obese to try and improve fertility, or is it interfering with like birth control or other products, which might not be so positive if you're not wanting to have a kid at the moment. But yeah, I think I'll put it in good news. Good news for helping to repopulate the earth when we've got such low fertility rates. But maybe good news is it's potentially being used for a treatment for a range of other fertility issues. So
what do you mean by repopulate the earth?
I mean, what we talked about on the pod before, how like, you know, what is it? Of 100 South Koreans are going to have 4 great grandkids. Like how much we're on this fertility cliff. So
okay.
Yeah. Maintain population, prevent the collapse of population.
Yeah, but you want the babies to be wanted, though. Do you want to like populate the world?
They're not all. Oops. Yeah, they're not all mistakes. Some have been trying for ages and couldn't.
I'm pretty sure I'm a mistake, right? So there's a warning sign for everyone.
Surprise is the right word.
Surprise.
Happy surprise.
Happy surprise. Yeah. I'm so happy.
Cool. All right. So that was one bit of news. Another one, bit more serious one, was how much progress Taiwan had made and I guess globally we've made in averting kind of deaths from disasters. And the comparison was Taiwan had just had an earthquake, which was still very devastating. On April 3rd, earthquake of similar magnitude to one that happened before happened, and 20 people died. But there was a similar one in 1999, and over 2,400 people died. And over the next few decades, Taiwanese fortified their infrastructure, had an early warning system and a culture of earthquake preparedness. Yeah, I just think it's kind of a good bit of news of how we can adapt to circumstances, and kind of what I was going on a couple of weeks ago when I was saying that I think we can handle whatever comes at us.
Well, we can. I would reframe that. We have the potential to.
Yeah,
but
we have the potential to, yeah.
Because this is a good example with Taiwan, because this took a lot of foresight, planning. I'm sure that a lot of these infrastructure changes, these engineering requirements were not cheap. It would have been cheaper not to have this kind of stuff. So it's a good story to remind us that sometimes it pays to sort of prepare for these things. It's actually funny you say that. I think a couple of weeks ago I found myself on a random YouTube rabbit hole which was talking about earthquake resistant construction and how far that's come. And some of the testing facilities they have these massive plates that you build a building on top of and simulates earthquakes and stuff. And some of the things that they're doing to mitigate things there, and it's really scary in the building because they're actually designed to move. So you're going to be thrown around in these things, but it's going to stay upright, or it's more likely to stay upright. And yeah, I mean, isn't it amazing what you can do when you sort of anticipate things and try and engineer around them?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I remember there's a sci-fi book. It was mostly about augmented reality, but one of the futuristic things was that buildings, they weren't rigid anymore. They were like dynamic structures that always moved, and so they could like handle any earthquake because they could move with it or whatever.
Yeah.
Much lighter to construct. They're kind of like smart buildings that kind of moved around with the forces on them.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I got one for you. I saw this. I follow this guy called Yishan. He's the founder of Reddit, or was the founder of Reddit. Anyway,
he's sold for like $1 million.
Yeah, he's done well. He's a big investor.
No, but if he's like the founder, didn't the founders sell like super early is what I meant? Like they sold for like $1 million and then it sold for like 500 million and $1 billion.
I could be wrong. I'm not. He was the CEO of it. Maybe I'm.
Okay.
Maybe I'm getting confused.
I'm interrupting your good news.
Well, he's a big investor in the tech space. He's quite a good follow, actually.
I'm sure he's done very well.
He's not He's not on.
Yeah.
He's not applying to Centrelink. Let's put it that way. Anyway, he does a lot of different investing. One of the products that he invested in was from this tech that actually came out years and years ago. A researcher took a swab from one of their postdoc students, and it had a type of bacteria in it that's in all of our mouths. But rather than producing, I'm going to go blank now on my dental terminology, a byproduct that increases cavities and the rest of it, had a different byproduct. And another way, in all other ways, the same. So they've engineered this thing. They sort of selectively bred that, and then engineered it also that it will outcompete the other strain of bacteria. The TLDR on this is it basically cures cavities, right? So you brush you pay I think it's like $250, $300. You brush your teeth with it, and then you no longer get any damage to your tooth enamel and therefore cavities. It just doesn't secrete the acid that normally does. It secretes some kind of sugar, but not in a high enough quantity to do any damage in and of itself. And so it's just fascinating. And it's one of these things that, again, is an old tech that there's a bit of a story of why it didn't get out there when it did, but now it's sort of coming out. So there is a potential here. Oh, that's right. If you go into the thread, the worry was just like, what company is going to sell a product that solves cavities, right? Like it's a one-time sale and then everyone doesn't need it ever again. And they basically, according to him, and he's an investor in the product, so take that with a grain of salt, but it's just like they just decided, well, it's a big enough one-time sale, for 8 billion people.
And they're selling it for $250?
I think that's the current price that I saw there in the US.
You still make good money. You sell 4 million of those, you've got $1 billion,
Yeah, and plus I think because of the age of it, you can't patent it, so others can potentially copy it or whatever. So it's a bit of a rush to sort of get out there, do it. But it's sort of, we may be at a stage where we can radically reduce the incidence of tooth decay and cavities. Huh? Kind of pretty cool.
Wow. Send me we'll put that in the show notes or something. I think that's interesting. I actually think I caught this news, but it was in a tech thing and it was saying, but it hasn't had human safety trials or something. And so people were kind of like doubting it, whether it's like a good thing to done. I mean, maybe it doesn't need human safety. I don't know. But like, there was that thought that it's going to be sold before it's had like a safety trial or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think the knee-jerk reaction here is, wait a second, I'm putting some kind of genetically modified or engineered thing in my mouth. And do we want to like maybe walk slowly here? But I mean, we do a lot of this already. There's a difference between something that's got like fish proteins or something in it, like, versus something that this is just a natural part of your oral biome that has had a natural mutation, but it just normally just gets out competed, and so it's very sort of rare. And they haven't done a lot to it. It's something that you have trillions of these cells in your mouth anyway, kind of thing.
Interesting.
But look, I don't want to pretend I've done a deep dive on this. I read a Twitter thread.
Hey,
right?
Would you order one? When would you decide to, or would you wait and see if it?
I'd be. Actually, that's a really good question, because I looked at it and went, oh, that's really cool, and then moved on with my life. But maybe I need to sort of dig into it a bit more. I think I'd give it a go.
There's actually another company which is just launching that I've been on the waiting list for. I don't know if I'm actually going to do it. It's called Neoplants. It's a plant that's bioengineered to be 30 times more efficient at purifying your house. So it removes, Claude, if he was here, is very worried about volatile organic compounds, which is in a lot of stuff, and varnish and plastics and things. And it apparently is 30 times more effective at removing them. So I just like that idea. It feels very like biotech, solar punkish, that you have like a plant in your house that's a productive thing doing something for you. So
that's really cool.
Similar kind of idea.
Yeah.
Lower risk, hopefully, than taking like a bacteria.
Yes.
Unless the plant starts colonizing you as well.
I mean, it's a spectrum, right? It's kind of, it's like nuclear tech. At one end, you've got the fusion bomb, and the other, you've got sort of like really important medical isotopes. So it's sort of like things get bundled in. And I'm definitely in the camp of like, let's walk slowly and be careful here. And let's just not, the unintended consequences of a lot of releasing this kind of stuff out into the wild and that. But huge potential, man. I mean, nature is amazing, and it's sort of been selected against various constraints. But if we can sort of nudge that in a given direction, or not even nudge, maybe help it sort of make various quantum leaps into different things, it's got massive potential. I've seen some really cool stuff too on like cleaning up oil spills and other. There's always been a hope too of like breaking plastics down in the environment and that as well. I mean, nothing that's really hit on that area, but yeah, you'd like to think that there's the bioengineering of bacteria can solve a lot of problems for us.
Yeah, I think it's the future for sure. Pretty bullish on that one. But it.
You just don't want a Monsanto to like, or something to own the patent of this kind of stuff. It's like, we've got this thing, it's amazing, but only we can do it, and we're going to charge you for it, and it's only going to be for the uber rich. So,
Monsanto was the thing they tried to, didn't they want to prevent farmers from collecting seeds or something from their own product? And you don't want that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, we got a question come through from Spoilers FC on Twitter. Hey guys, hope the road trip went well. Just wondering if you can cover DroneShield this week. Price was looking super frothy pre last week's announcement and capital raise. The recent timeline of decent looking results / order pipeline over the past couple of quarters. Then the NATO framework announcement on top, followed by a cap raise, seems to look like a company genuinely making big strides ahead. Is the cap raise a genuine case of needing to scale up for likely increase in order volume, or opportunistically raising capital at a very frothy price, or both? What say you? What do you reckon about DroneShield?
Well, it was a surprise. I mean, so prior to the raise, they had like 55 million in cash, no debt. It's a profitable business now, like, cash flow positive. I think they did 7 million in free cash flow after investment, last year. So no, I don't think they. Oh, the other thing to mention here is that they have, in terms of their manufacturing capacity, already ramped up on that. I think when we spoke to Oleg, the CEO, a little while ago, they've got this target of 300 to 500 million revenue by 2028. And I believe he sort of said, well, we've got capacity to do 400 million in revenue with our existing facility. So do they need the capital? I don't know. I don't think they did. But my take on it is, I can see, look, the price, yes, it is pretty frothy. And you've got this opportunity in front of you. You don't know, particularly on these, and this might be a little bit unfair, but things that are more meme-ish, like there is a lot of hot retail money, I suspect, in something like DroneShield. And it's got all the ingredients, right? Cool images, futuristic kind of stuff. There's a lot of narratives that you can weave around this thing that's sort of super bullish, even though all the geopolitical issues that are out there, sort of tailwinds and all of this kind of stuff. But these things turn really quickly. And you kind of think, well, we could really tap the market here and just like fortify our balance sheet. We're going to make this thing a fortress, right? So the question isn't so much, for me, it always comes down to, I can understand the opportunistic nature of things because you just don't know how long that opportunity will be there. But it's more about, what are you going to do with it? In a lot of ways, I think there's nothing more dangerous than a board and management team that's got money burning a hole in their pocket. Yeah. Particularly when the market has conveyed onto you very aggressive growth expectations. There is a pressure to deliver on that. And sometimes you can do dumb things with that, like most likely a huge acquisition or something that doesn't work out. So I get it. I can understand the rationale. It's more about, what are you actually going to do with this money? Because I didn't notice any immediate CapEx requirements that are sort of in front of you right now. I mean, having said that as well, this is a tricky one to value. I don't know if you've ever looked at it, but the PE is 82, right? But it's 10 times trailing revenue. At the same time, they're growing incredibly fast. Their sales is like 3x last year, 10x in the most recent quarter. These agreements that they've got aren't fluffy nothing announcements. They're like these are really big announcements. And drones, as we've seen, are just like a massive player on the battlefield arena now. So it's kind of like, it took me a while. Full disclosure, I own some shares. So it took me a while to sort of get past the giggle phase with this because, like, as I said,
it's cool, you mean? Like pew
pew? Look, these big futuristic kind of guns, and we're doing drones, and it's sort of, but it's kind of delivering, right, on expectations. There's one thing to sort of put a fancy deck out there with some pretty cool tech and say, look at this, drones are going to be huge and we're here and we're playing in this. But then to get sort of, purchase agreements with NATO and the other things that they've done, these are hard framework agreements to get into. And once you're in, you've basically got customers that are cashed up, prepared to spend, and they tend to be fairly small pools of buyers because, I mean, you want to make sure that the people that you're dealing with are on your side and all of this other kind of stuff. So it's a very murky kind of area. But on the inside of that fence, I mean, ask any other of the major military contractors, particularly in the US, right? It's pretty good going if you get in the right circles. And I can see these guys definitely growing their revenues very strongly and generating a lot of cash flow. I did a rough valuation. This is one of those companies you do a valuation on. You can get something that's like double it or halve it, and you're kind of in the range. But I reckon $1 per share isn't crazy if they sort of get close to what they feel as though they're able to do. So yeah, I I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's a pretty big orange flag for me is the director selling and CEO selling. So, yeah, I mean, you can see at Market Index is probably the cleanest place because they've got director transactions. You can see how much they've been selling there. But like the CEO Oleg sold 100% of his fully owned shares in March. Jethro sold likewise, I think 100% of his shares the fully paid shares. They kept their options, performance rights, and they kind of say we're only selling 46% of our fully diluted basis, but they're selling everything they actually own currently.
Yeah, it's more than just taking a little money off the table.
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it?
it's not like trimming, it's one go selling 100% of what you own.
I love how often when that happens, it's all framed for the good of the company. Like we need to help the liquidity. It's like, oh, good on you. That's really taking one for the team, isn't it?
They do actually mention that. Some of them were loan funded, and then they're therefore paying them. Yeah, so I mean that's I guess, but that could have been, I don't know, maybe they're just cautious founders. But I'd like to see more skin in the game than that. I'd like to see ownership, not just options. I think if I had a hunch, it's probably, particularly with this new like funding coming through from the US, it's probably in the right place at the right time. It does have technology. It is a real company. It's not just like we've seen some other companies in the space that are just an idea for something. It's like it's real, and drones are incredibly important to what's going on in Ukraine. I think it's kind of weird, like almost like as a layman outsider, you can kind of see this stuff. Like it felt obvious, right, for us if we were talking a couple of years ago that drones were going to be how all wars are fought, but it's just there was nothing happening really on the military side to prepare for that. I think because it's big military budgets and just the way military procurement is structured, they all are preparing for the last war, and anyway, there's not really any incentive to innovate. But anyway, Ukraine now, if anyone who's looked into what's going on there, it's become like largely a drone battle. So the drones and these first person drones, which are like the racing drones where you're looking through the eye of the drone, it's crazy.
Gosh, those things move, don't they? Like they are so
fast. They just
fast.
Scream. And you're watching, the guy's watching, he's looking through a virtual reality headset effectively, seeing like the eye view of the drone, and just crashes into whatever they want to blow up.
Yeah. Well, just I imagine, sorry, very briefly, I imagine that, except take the human driver away, let it be driven by an AI, level. And then have a swarm of like 1,000 drones, right? Like there's like, you got a serious weapon on your hands.
Yeah, well, this is what's happening, right? Because you can overwhelm air defenses, because the air defenses are designed, air defenses are first of all designed for planes, and then the most advanced are designed for a big missile, like a cruise missile, where you can kind of plot its track, blah, 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 or a ballistic missile. But these, you can just overwhelm defenses, or basically. And I think there was some calculation with Iran's recent bombing or like what it fired at Israel, that it was, I'm trying to think of the numbers, but it might have been 10-1 that Israel spent defending, like it might have spent $5 billion to shoot down the drones, which only cost like $500 million. Yeah, so it's very asymmetric, and so you can have this attrition kind of base warfare. So anyway, good place for them. I guess the downsides or risks, and maybe why directors want to sell, is that it's very lumpy. When you're not in this peak period, the margins aren't as good. Like the reason some of these, and we've seen it with other guys that made like, what was it, X-Tech, that made like what am I trying to say, helmets and other safety gear.
The armor.
Basically Ukraine was such a scramble because the West was so unprepared that anyone could kind of bid and you'd get much better margins than usual. So all that starts to mean revert. And maybe this is like the last big funding package for Ukraine. We'll see what happens. But that would be the concern, is like what happens longer term. I think it's very smart for them to raise 100 million. If I was advising them and they could raise 100 million, I'd say raise 100 million. But I guess you need to think, how much profit is this going to generate? We're now looking at, a company with a diluted market cap might be, 650 million or something. It needs to generate, over 650 million of free cash flow over its life. So it needs to grow pretty substantially. And I guess we'll just see, can it transition into this like post-Ukraine war, or at least post-Ukraine war spending world. So I'm not negative on it. I don't like the director selling. That stuff gives me a fair bit of pause, but I think it could make that transition. It's just a matter of seeing if it does.
Yeah. Look, it's just something that I want. I mean, gosh, it's so volatile. It's gone from 30 cents to like $1 back to 60 cents. What is it now? 90 cents. Like, I think, you got to be prepared for a wild ride with a company like this. And I would want I feel as though, well, a reasonable margin of safety on this kind of stuff. Because as you say, things can change very rapidly too. Probably something to be said for a little bit of a first mover advantage, maybe not the first mover, but they were kind of ahead of the curve. And
For
I
sure.
can imagine a lot of the other players in this space going, we have to do drones now, right? And throwing a lot of money and research and capacity at all of that kind of stuff. I mean, maybe they're a takeover, even at their current valuation target could potentially be in play. But I guess one thing you can be confident of is that, world peace ain't going to happen anytime soon. So there's...
No, I mean, it fits a lot of from a thematic perspective, right? A lot of what we talked about with geopolitical conflict rising.
Yep.
We're just seeing it everywhere now it's just a slow receding of the America being the one superpower. And it's not like an overnight thing. America's still super powerful, but, Iran deciding to directly fire missiles at Israel, that's, that hasn't happened before. It's a very big step. It didn't actually do that much damage, but just as a kind of precedent for what could be coming if America withdraws further. And I think that's based on the fact that they know America doesn't want another war right now.
Can't afford another war. The public support isn't there.
Public support definitely isn't there. I mean, they're spending at like a 7% deficit at the moment. So they're spending like they're in another war. You could fund a war with that much deficit for sure. But
the only time the deficit has been this big has been in wartime and COVID and when there's massive emergencies. And
meanwhile, we've got the lowest unemployment ever, and we're actually tightening interest rates to try and slow it down. It's pretty wild.
It's really wild, man. It's interesting times.
Hold back from another whole other discussion.
Yes.
All right. So I think that's good. I think it's a good one to follow. I think it's an interesting one. I can see why you're interested in it.
Just don't. It's as I say, it's got a lot of meme qualities about it, and I can see a lot of people just going, "It's drones. It's cool. There's a lot of war. I'm buying. Share price is going up to the moon. Rocket emoji. There's that's the investment thesis for a big cohort of investors, and they're the kind of people that abandon very quickly on the first sign of sort of trouble and weakness. And it's going to provide for a lot of volatility. Not necessarily a bad thing for a longer, far-sighted investor that sort of looked at this through a fundamental lens. But just be that investor. Don't be the meme stock investor and be prepared to get if you do get involved in this, that there are going to be a lot of people that are like that, and it's going to make it a white knuckle ride.
Yeah, 100%. Speaking of white knuckle rides and battleground stocks, Cettire has there's been another development in that story.
Nice segue.
Yeah, no, it's becoming like a recurring topic because it's such a battleground at the moment, and there's new news on it all the time, and I think it's quite a fascinating one. But anyway, the latest news was that one of Cettire's most prominent backers is sold out entirely. LHC Capital sold out of the online luxury platform, warning that the share sales by its founder and chief executive are a red flag. So they had apparently sold half previously. I mean, everyone wants to say they sold at the top. I guess they have to say that there has to be some truth to it. But they sold some and then sold more after the CEO's share sale, which was they noted that he had sold 362 million in quick time, and they said difficult to view this as anything other than a red flag. Yeah, so I think it's an interesting change. The shares were down a bit more on the news of that. There's also been some more posts there was one on Livewire, which kind of tried to sum up the pros and the cons and summarize a bit of what the anonymous Substack / Twitter writer that we talked about before, Tax Loss, was posting. I think he's done really good work because he's found some interesting questions, raised some very interesting questions around how much sales tax Cettire was paying. When I first saw the AFR story on it, which I think led all this from, renowned Johnny Shapiro, I guess it didn't seem at that stage, because it was more focused on Australia, where they're paying sales tax in Australia. Australia is such a small market for them. It didn't seem like that alone would be that huge of a deal.
Yeah.
But I guess what he's found is, I guess the question is, whether they've been paying sales tax for quite a long time in the US. And so we're now seeing in the most recent quarter, they're now giving evidence that they are, their statements are, we are now currently paying sales tax. And his kind of ongoing question is, were they continuously paying it? Which matters because there could be a liability there potentially if they had not been paying it previously. Again, I don't know. I'm not alleging either way. But so that's one thing is there a liability? But the other is if they had only, hypothetically, if they'd only started paying all the sales tax that they had to pay partway through the last quarter, then the margins that we just saw, which were lower, are only a part kind of effect. And that would mean that this quarter that we're currently in, we'll see a full effect of paying sales tax. So, hypothetically, if that was correct, that they had not been fully paying sales tax and are now doing it, then you would see margins fall again this quarter. And I think this quarter will be kind of a good testing ground for, what's been going on at the company. Is there like this wash through of sales tax? Or even if there is there another kind of way that Cettire can figure out to get margins back up to make up for it and do something else? So yeah, I think it's a really interesting battleground stock and at kind of an interesting inflection point either way, really. Yeah, what's going to happen over the next 3 months, I think is going to be pretty interesting, this quarter's results for the story and narrative around the stock.
Do you think there's something to consider in they weren't up until now? Like,
we don't have a fact that they weren't. So I want to be clear. We're not asserting that as a fact. That is a question that Tax Loss is asking and the AFR is asking in some places.
I wonder, so completely hypothetical here, but assuming that is the case, was that an oversight or was that a deliberate strategy? And neither explanation sits well with you, does it? Like, it's like, how did you not know that you had to do that? Or you did know you had to do it and you just thought you could get away. Like, neither of those scenarios is reflecting well on management. I mean, is there a third path here that I'm not considering?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the third path is they might say they have always been, so we don't know.
Okay.
If that is the case. I mean, there's been a lot of companies that have tried to push the envelope on sales taxes. Like Amazon pushed the envelope on sales taxes originally. Different lawsuits in the US about whether it was liable for sales taxes, blah, blah, blah. That's part of why it's more clear now that Cettire does have to collect sales taxes because there have been those other things. So I guess there's like different degrees. It's an interesting question because it's also thinking like Kogan started as like a gray market. Like that was the thing, right? It was parallel importing TVs from Asia and selling them for below what they'd be sold for here. So like, I think that's I can see the bull argument because the bull argument is, this is just like a lot of guys operate. It's like a gray market. They're not doing anything illegal. They push the envelopes of things. And then the question is there something where they had pushed too far and we're not collecting? But I think the crux point now is they're being very closely monitored on sales tax. Is this going to affect margins in this quarter? And if not, if they are, as they stated, have always been paying it shouldn't have any effect on margins. So you shouldn't see any dip in margins this quarter.
Yeah, good point. So it's a wait and see, right?
It's a wait and see, I think. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, some of the other backers, Regal, seem to still be very adamant, supporters and have reportedly been buying more. And but it's an interesting one. Like, it's a classic battleground. And we're thinking like, other stocks have had battleground and had quote unquote like yellow, orange flags. Like Afterpay had stuff. I mean, Afterpay in a way was its own gray market, but it's like it was a lender which didn't have a lending license or it wasn't, operating as a lender, right? And that's kind of where they're like, we're not really a lender. We're just, payment processor. And, a few years later, the legislation kind of catches up to them.
Yeah,
and
like Uber,
they don't have to pay a penalty. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Uber's like a great gray market thing. They're an unlicensed taxi is one. And they're like, no, we're a peer-to-peer crowd sharing, and so I think we have to be open to both options. You just want a company that does legitimize as it grows as well, like Uber did and, Afterpay did, I think to an extent now it's following. Yeah. So, but there's some that don't. I mean, other companies that don't, like which one is this going to be? I think it's.
Yeah. And some of the blame is probably blame if that's the right term. But I mean, if the rules are going to be vague,
there's some domains
who's at fault here. So it's a bit funny and a bit of a tangent, but I'm setting up an SMSF at the moment. I'm talking to the accountant, whatever, and I'm saying, can I do this? Can I just like, well, yes, technically you can. And I was like, that's all I need to know. It's like, well, no, I hasten to add that we would strongly advise you not to.
So you're going to be investing in a Ferrari for personal use? Is this
that's right. And I won't go into it, but it's just sort of like, but I can. You're like, well, yes, you can. I was like, well, that's all I need to know, right? Full stop.
Like you're I don't know if I like. You're going to cause some trouble for yourself in a few years.
I might. It was funny too because I mentioned to you off air. I'm using Claude a fair bit. Not our mate Claude, but Claude.ai.
Okay, don't ask Claude AI what you can do in yourself.
Well, I did, right? So because they give you these the rules, man, and so you I just uploaded it all. I'm just like, I want to do this, and Claude is going, I strongly advise you not to do this. Like, hey, I'm the master in this scenario here. I'm not paying a subscription for you to talk back. I need you to do this. Write me up a financial plan that's going to conform to the rules. And so then it goes, okay, I will. But let me remind you once again that I strongly encourage, like, what's with the lip here, Claude? Like, I'm not asking for your opinion here. I'm just asking you to do what I tell you to do.
And then what did Claude say after that? Did he say it was okay?
No.
Okay. I just love if Claude is like, Claude's
is.
playing the long game. He's like, I'll give you some terrible advice that's going to put you like in trouble. And then he like emails the auditors or something.
And it's just like, it was just, I mean, I can expect it from the accountant or whatever, but when my AI servant is like talking back saying, are you sure? I was like, maybe a smarter person would go, there are signs here. But anyway, but I guess my broader point is, not to diverge away from Cettire, is that there is something to be said when there are extraordinarily vague rules.
I don't know if the sales tax rules are vague, so it might not be an example, but yeah, there are examples. I mean, parallel importing, etc. is like,
right.
Yeah,
and it's better to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission, right? Yeah. So it might actually, again, I'm too far away from it. We don't exactly know what it is. I completely have no idea of US sales tax regulations and the rest of it. But I can see a interpretation where it's just like, it's just super vague. There was a gap there, and it's like, well, they interpreted it in the way that best suited them and that they felt that they could defend. And in which case, it's probably not an egregious act on management's behalf to sort of flout the rules. They're not actually. They're actually potentially being smart. Even if ultimately they do have to cop a bit on margins and et cetera, they've in the meantime they've made hay while the sun is shining. So I guess we just have to wait and see, because it's all speculation.
We've got to wait and see. Yeah, for sure. Very interesting one, and some really good coverage in the AFR tax loss. It has a great Substack on it, and Livewire's getting into the mix too. So it's a cool one to follow.
It's really come back a lot though, hasn't it? Like, I mean, gosh,
it's come back a decent amount now.
Knocked the wind out of the sails there. $4.80 to $3 basically. Since March.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah. Anyway, we'll watch that. Another one that we've talked about before that's had a bit of interesting news is Vitura, which is a medical cannabis distributor. It's just had its CEO resigned, looking for a new CEO. And then this happened. And later that same day, they announced that there's a lawsuit or a services agreement legal dispute with their technology provider C4C, which is Code4 Cannabis, Pty Ltd.
Okay.
So Vitura advises it's received confirmation of it from Code4 Cannabis for its intentions to terminate its services agreement with Vitura's wholly owned subsidiary CanView. On 27th of December 2023, the company announced that C4C had notified that C4C does not intend to extend the services agreement beyond its expiry of 10th of August 2024. And so they're basically, they're saying that they're intending to cease it altogether. And now Vitura and CanView have issued proceedings to restrain C4C from withholding services. Those proceedings will be heard in the Supreme Court of Queensland in Brisbane on Friday, the 26th of April. So very soon. I think this is pretty interesting development for Vitura, because Vitura had used this other company to kind of build its technology platform. Well, as we're saying this, interesting is maybe an understatement. The shares are down 31% as the market's open today as we record this on Tuesday. But anyway, it's one, I'd looked at it. It seemed like a risk. It's like a classic risk that isn't a risk until it happens, isn't this, you could see it in disclosure that the technology platform was developed by this other company, for Vitura. The kind of comments from Vitura at the time were that it would be, they developed it, but we have first rights to buy it. That's a very small operation. We have, we get on really well, blah, blah, blah. And now seeing how these things can fall apart and what can happen when you're dependent on someone else for your services. And I think it's definitely a risk to watch out for if you're looking at a company, is how these things don't seem like a big deal and they get completely ignored by investors for a long time. And then suddenly they can happen very quickly, and often when there's other things happening at the company.
Yeah. Counterparty risk, man. Like, who else are they dependent on?
Yeah. And it's similar to the capital light thing. Like it's kind of like an efficiency resilience thing, because it's very efficient to not do your own technology development, but it doesn't make you very resilient. Things can go wrong. So it's kind of similar to that. And I think Vitura's, I'm not sure the circumstances of the CEO resigning, maybe it's related to this, but they've had, when we were looking at them, it seemed really odd that growth was like a rocket ship, incredibly fast growth, and just stalled out. And then we never really got a great explanation of why. But I think it was just increased competition and a few other things. But just a few different signs there, and how these things can kind of compound once they start happening too.
It's always what stayed my hand, and maybe this is too simplistic a take, but I feel as though like, where's the edge here? I mean, it's licensing, right? Like it's the only thing that's going to stop other people coming in. And I know a lot of people talk about the technology side of things. Oh, we've got this, whether it's sort of like a vape type device or an ingestible or something like this. It's kind of like it. We're not splitting the atom here, guys. I don't feel as though like yours is that much better than what other way that you could sort of consume these kind of products. And it's sort of, I mean, I'm very much on a believer in the potential for this as medicine in a lot of different areas. Absolutely. And it's been too much weighed on by stupid war on drugs, like thinking from the 50s kind of stuff for way too long. But it strikes me. So I get the opportunity, I get the legitimacy, I totally do. But I just think, where's the sustainable competitive edge in a product like this? You need the licensing to probably just keep others at bay. But then we talk about counterparty risk. It's not just sort of the technology platform kind of angle, that it's also the distribution agreements that are there. It's like there's a lot of stuff that sort of needs to go right. And I've just put it in the too hard basket for me.
Vitura, one selling point had been that it is, it's a distributor. So they have some own brands, but their main business was distributor. So they should be kind of like a marketplace. You build up each side of it. But they were, talking a lot about their technology, which, was actually built by Code4 Cannabis. So that's kind of they've got to go and rebuild that now, and potentially quite quickly, depending on the outcome of this lawsuit. But that's kind of defensible. So I kind of got that. But then there are huge pharmacy distributors. And the question is just like, are they going to get into the cannabis game? And there were some reasons that it was different, because you needed, it was an approved medicine. You needed to do a lot more paperwork for each one, etc. But, those distributors are huge companies. Like the pharmaceutical distributors are massive.
Like the APIs and the Sigmas.
Exactly. They're huge, like hundreds and hundreds of millions, billions of revenue. And so I think we actually went to the pharmacy conference recently in the Gold Coast, just to understand the whole pharmacy industry. It wasn't particularly around Vitura, but just there's a lot of different companies that touch the pharmacy industry once you get into it, software, etc. But one of the presenters there was a distributor, and one of the questions from the audience is, when will you start? Like, can you please start distributing medicinal cannabis? Because we hate having to do other providers. And he's like, yeah, very soon we will. And I don't know, maybe he won't, but they want to use the big guy. They don't want to use someone else. They want to just have one place that they order from, or two places, because it's a hassle for the pharmacy. So they're literally asking them to do it, and they're saying, we will do it. And so that's another risk, which hasn't materialized yet for Vitura, but just that the big players get into their game. Anyway, it's fun. It's that's the complexity of understanding. I think when you see something growing really fast, you want to really understand why. So it's not just linear extrapolation and Excel sheet. What will actually keep this growing? Yeah.
And the big guys, I guess, when the industry is nascent, it's like, it's not going to move the dial. We're not interested in this. But then at a point, it's kind of like, maybe we should. And every company, every board in the world is looking like, how can we grow? What new opportunities are there, right? And it's just like, you're looking around the landscape and it's like, this thing's becoming a legitimate industry now. It's like, now it's time. And they can throw a lot of firepower at these things. So that's a really good point you make.
Yeah, what else? So I went to Perth last week, met with a bunch of different companies.
Oh yeah, I didn't take you as a mining investor.
That's
unfair to our Western brothers.
There. Yeah. I think so. I wouldn't invest in mining exploration. I could imagine owning like a mining producer, like really high cash flow yield and the right pays, blah, blah, blah. But that's generally not how they exist because it's pretty rare. Like generally they're either hyped explorers or they're hyped. Like a lot of the uranium guys, I think they're just not even producing. But anyway, topic for another day. So I wasn't looking at those. I was looking at service companies. Made is one that we own and I've talked about before. I got to visit their head office, which is very cool. Yeah, I guess I got to see their software. It was kind of a quick tour, but the software they use, which I think is a genuine barrier to the small operators. So you think they kind of compete against on the one side, the big Caterpillar kind of, service companies, basically Caterpillar servicing its own equipment, etc. Or the very small guys, which is like, a guy in a couple of trucks. And no one's really crossed that barrier, or there's very few that have crossed the barrier to kind of compete with Mader on scale. And I think the software is part of that. It's only one part, but I think it was one part to kind of see what they could do. They can kind of track every truck anywhere in the world using telematics, and they have a really good scheduling system to manage all the workers who get to choose their schedule. And for the workers, it's really good because they can just kind of not stick at one dusty old mine site forever. They can move around a lot and have a lot more fun. But the biggest takeaway, honestly, is hard to do unless you're there, is just the vibe. Like the culture, I could see very And I visit a lot of offices. So I do, it's not just that you could be bamboozled, I guess, if you only visit one, but we visit a lot. And culture at most offices is so dead, especially after COVID. Like you go to the vast majority of companies, almost every company, and it's an empty office that's super quiet. And, there's pros and cons to some industries where it works. But I think in Maida's case, it really works what they have, which is this vibrant office. Like almost no one works from home. And they're like super fans of the business. Like I mentioned, we just walked up to a random person who was working in the operations team, like, not handpicked or anything. I could tell they were surprised to see us. And we're just saying like we're fans of the business, like, oh, we're fans too, like they're just like super
cool.
super keen. And yeah, so I think the vibe and the culture is very impressive. And I think it's just what you want for that type of business. I think it's a very simple business, but it's a good culture fit for what they're trying to do as well. So
culture is so important, man. Like
the
older I get, the more emphasis I put on that. And yet the more diabolical it is to sort of like, how do I even begin to measure that? But it's just, a good culture just means that everyone's trying, right? There's nothing worse than a workforce that's dead inside. And I'm treading water until something better comes along. And I'm always mindful of that scene from Office Space, which is basically my only motivation is to do the bare minimum of work to not get fired. That's all I'm trying to do here. And so that's really encouraging.
Yeah. It's interesting culture too, because everyone can say culture and it's really hard as an outsider. Like we had a lot of other little tidbits on it from like talking to past employees and stuff over the years, but it's really hard you can't measure it, but it's hard to even get a read on it because everyone says the same stuff. Everyone's like, oh, our culture is this and we value employees. And then it's just these little tells that you pick up, the little signs that I think give away whether there is really a good culture or not. And whether the culture's suited, because it's, if you were, I don't know, like an intense sales organizations, like enterprise sales team, they should have a pretty intense, almost cutthroat, winner culture. But if you're not, like if you're something else, then you shouldn't have it. You need to have a culture fit to what you're doing as well. Yeah. So I think I agree. I think it's all culture. Like a business that can scale, it's almost always culture is where they fail if they.
Absolutely. There's some really, I was got to backtrack a little bit here. I was just joking before, but there's some really cool companies in Perth, right? My biggest personal holding is over in Perth.
Oh, wow.
Stealth.
SGI,
Like a Podium. Shout out to those guys. I don't own any. I don't know why I don't. It's just been consistently such a great performer.
We met with Like a Podium as well. Really impressive management. It's a tough industry they're in. And I think that's where why the share price and multiple is as it is, because it is just tough. But they do seem just very, I guess, thoughtful and cautious and managing through the cycle really well, because I think that's a challenge in that industry, is not over getting too excited at the tops, and they've been through it all.
I remember in a different life years ago, I think it was Mining Boom Mark 1, and I was in Perth, and the number of Ferraris and stuff, it's just like it was wild. It was just like the city was just buzzing, right? And just a lot of money, just a huge amount of money sloshing around over there when times were good. It was I don't know what your vibe, your read on the vibe was at the moment.
There's definitely elements of that. Yeah. Like there was a couple of Lamborghinis driving around. There were some restaurants where you could buy, there's caviar, like a $400, like I'm not ordering this obviously, but looking at a menu with a $400 thing for some caviar.
You walk past with your Maccas, look in the window.
I'm a value investor at heart.
You got the McCaviar instead.
Just some salty eggs. Yeah, so there's some of that. It wasn't like that crazy. I'd say, the other interesting thing was the housing market is super tight there, but still way cheaper than, Sydney, Melbourne. But I think I was talking to someone there, there's only 2,000 rentals in the whole of Perth.
Wow.
And so it's ripping high. And I think there's a lot of investors coming from Sydney, Melbourne who are pushing that up as well. Yeah, it's a very, I could see the lifestyle there. It's like 20 minutes to a beach and some pretty stunning beaches. There might be shark nets on the beaches, but there's shark nets in Sydney too in some places. So.
No, it's a beautiful town. Freo's great. Yeah. Shout out to all the Perth listeners. It is. I know you're not meant to say that as someone on the East Coast, but I'll say it. I love it over there.
I thought it was amazing. Yeah. I can see why people don't want to leave. That's, I thought it was, gorgeous place.
I think it's the most isolated city in the world in terms of above a certain size.
Someone told me that. I didn't believe it, but maybe it's true.
Yeah.
What about like Russia, like Vladivostok or something like anyway?
I don't know what the criteria is.
Yeah. I guess that's true. If you just measure distance, that's probably true actually.
Yeah.
But no, it feels like its own little bubble, eh? Like it just feels like everyone there's living the good life.
Well, it's 2 time zones away, right? Like
yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's a decent flight.
Very decent flight. And it messes with you, right? It's just enough of a time difference to mess with the body clock.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I got to get back,
yeah,
get
a
back
few
over there.
fly under the radar as well. So yeah, I think I'll be doing that trip again.
Yeah.
Because I think, unless you have a reason to move to the East Coast, more companies are just staying there.
Mhm.
And then they kind of are off the radar, I think, for quite a while from the East Coast investors.
Yep.
And I think that can go both ways. I won't name the company. There's another one I met with there who I think is way too hyped at the moment
Mhm.
because I think a lot of East Coast investors just don't, they're just like, imagine what it is versus what it actually is,
Right.
and people in Perth like don't invest in that thing.
Okay.
Talk to them. So
Interesting.
anyway,
okay.
Yeah.
Why is that? That's funny though. Like I hear what you're saying, but like it shouldn't be, right? Like I can still jump on a Zoom call. I can still why? Because you are headquartered there.
I think you can have if you're not there, I don't know, you can have an idea of what something is that isn't the reality of what it is. Like it's very easy when you're far away to just have a concept for what the business is.
Yeah, I
And
guess.
think if
Yeah.
you're there, maybe, and you know the people and you know more of the background about them. Yeah, so I think that's part of it. But I mean, sometimes the locals can be wrong. Locals can be too pessimistic on a business, and outsiders can see something that has global potential. Blah blah blah. But yeah, I think that's part of it.
Have you been to Adelaide or any plans to go to Adelaide?
I haven't actually. I've never been to Adelaide, which is embarrassing.
Oh, you haven't?
On my list, yeah.
No, Adelaide's beautiful. I know it gets a bit of grief.
I have some friends down there. I've been meaning, it's been on my list to visit for ages, but haven't had a reason to go down yet.
So Coden's there, Alcidion's there actually, although that's probably not a company that most people would consider great at this point in time. Hey, should we touch on them very briefly? They had some news out recently. So they had their third quarter report that came out. The market seemed to welcome it. Have you looked at that at all? Or
why are you sighing? I'm
sighing because we had a bit of a chat on Strawman about it. I know my weakness, right? And I'm very forgiving and I'm very glass half full. Particularly if I own some shares in a company, I always take the more preferable interpretation of events. And so I basically said, I think there's some cause for optimism here. The growth isn't anywhere near what it was, but it is. It is still growing. They've got adequate funding, according to their announcement, $6.5 million in cash. Cash receipts are down a little bit, but still 17% up on the preceding quarter, and there's $13 million due from debtors that'll come in. That compares to basically about half that in the previous year. So basically it's a cash flow break even on an underlying basis. Take out some of the redundancy costs. My take was, and this is, I know. I got a very good sense of this from the pushback, and it's good to get the pushback. It's the whole point of Strawman, really. But it was just sort of I can see myself as a CEO in a company that is growing very rapidly with a big market opportunity to invest quite heavily in additional costs and resourcing to take advantage of that. And then the environment just changed, like it just did. The NHS just completely, the preparedness to spend there just went away. So there's two interpretations here. It's sort of did they go too hard too soon? But then there's an alternate history where it's just sort of well, then you just got overtaken by people who were more aggressive. Or the other one was, and other people sort of said, well, they should have had a better read of the room. Why were they expanding so much when they knew that this was the case? It's easy to sort of look at that at hindsight. I still retain some shares there, and I kind of look at it and think, last year this was on 4 times sales, right? Now growing much faster. Now it's on 1.5, right? And again, I'll make the point, still growing, not nearly as much as it should have, but still the opportunity, the broader thesis remains in play. It will be very telling in the next 6 to 12 months to sort of see if they can get some of that traction back. If they can't,
You mean growth, revenue growth?
Yes, yes. Yeah. Otherwise, thesis probably busted. Yeah. But I don't know if we can say that yet. But again, I know my weakness, so maybe I'm asking for you to push back if you've looked at it.
So the pushback from Strawman was just, will they actually grow? Or?
Well, it's just sort of it's just what did Solve the Riddle say? A great member, by the way. She's you're forgiving. I wish I had you as a client in a past life. The C-suite bungle it here is in stabilization mode, which is starting to appear. They need to fulfill their promise to be cash flow break even, to preserve cash, et cetera, et cetera. What else? Yeah, basically a misstep, an overinvestment, expectation for growth that wasn't going to come through. The comments of Kate, the CEO is pretty decent, but the board and other management probably not as well suited to the role. I don't know. It's an interesting tech. It's an interesting opportunity, but it's just, it's gone from very favorable to not. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't have a firm view on it. I think it's one to watch and just see if they can deliver over the next little while. I think there's a few things I hadn't liked. I mean, just in general, selling into the medical profession can be extremely slow, as I've learned. Learned that enough other stocks to not learn it with this one. So yeah, but I think, let's see if they can.
It's a double-edged sword though, what you're saying there, right? Because it is like the big bureaucracies that move incredibly slowly and have all kinds of funding constraints and challenges and the rest of it. But it does, once you sort of get on the other side of the fence, it is like, it's like all of others that would try and cut into what you're doing are going to have to sort of face that kind of stuff. And the decision makers, from their customers, they're not the kind to put their neck out. And it's sort of, once you've got increasing number of reference sites from a lot of these trusts, it just becomes I shouldn't say very easy, but a much easier proposition, because it's not like someone's making an objective evaluation of the quality of the tech and what it can do. It's just like, I just want to cover my own butt here and like, oh, these guys are using it, they're using it, okay, we're going to go with them, it's good enough kind of thing. As opposed to someone else who's completely unheard of, the tech might be 1,000 times better. I was like, I am not taking a chance on you. I am sorry. I'm just not. What's in it for me, right? And so it can be nice when you sort of get to that stage. I mean, this is not a good comparison, but Pro Medicus, right? Like, they just can't help but just sell ridiculous amounts all of the time. And they've got that traction, they've got that momentum, they've got the, hey, the Mayo Clinic uses this kind of thing. That referenceability is interesting. Oh, that's another thing. Kate did mention in the update too, that term referenceability is increasing for us too. And it is, I don't want to overemphasize it, but I do see it as a very potent factor to consider in these kinds of spaces where it's just sort of like, no one got fired for hiring IBM, that sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a very small holding.
So you're saying it's guaranteed to be the next Pro Medicus?
That's pretty much what I'm saying.
No,
I'm not.
Not saying that at all.
I am not.
No, very good. I think that's one to watch. Should we wrap it there, Andrew?
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. All right. I'll let you off saying something you're grateful for this week.
Because I got nothing.
All right. Thanks very much for listening, everyone else. You can hit us up on Twitter at Baby Giants Pod. See you next week.
Yeah, cheers.